purpose of today really is to make you more aware of some of the key risks, whether they be supply chain, staff or customers defaulting, and really start people thinking about contingency, continuity, planning, case A, B and C. Some of you will have well-developed plans and others probably got none. So today's really about sharing some best practice, getting across Catherine Arrow's message, be safe, be informed and be kind, I think is a really good place to start. So if I just quickly, I don't think the macro world economic picture is any surprise to anyone. It's been changing day by day, but we've got a global health pandemic, stock market and oil price crashes. You know, it started with China closing factories, schools closing in Japan, etc., Italy, and now we just have the virus gathering speed overseas, travel restrictions and lockdowns globally. So of course, tourism, airlines, travel and hospitality, education were immediately hit, and now virtually all sporting events and conferences are off. Exporters and importers have been hurt. Media is just driving panic and confusion, seems to be their specialty. A global recession is now a certainty, and all economic commentators are saying it's going to be larger than the GFC. So some of you no doubt have heard the government's package today at 2 p.m, 12.1 billion, not a lot of detail yet, but certainly 5.1 billion of wage support if you can show you're 30% down. No one knows exactly how long this thing will last. Meanwhile, Warren Buffett's sitting on US $128 billion of cash and poised to strike.
Yeah, so you would have seen in the last few days in New Zealand constricting their service offering. What that means for your supply chain is, and the market's not actually preconditioned to this, is 70 to 80% of air freight cargo actually moves in the belly of those carriers. So when there's no passengers, there's no service. So we're actually going to see the airline hangar door, so to speak, come down in the next couple of weeks. And what that means is that space is going to largely actually disappear. So we're trying not to instill fear and panic in the market, much to the media's hatred, but we're working on some options that's actually going to continue to have that flow of that cargo through, because there's no two ways about it. The supply chain's going to have to keep going, we're going to have to keep eating, all of that sort of stuff. So we're really conditioning the market to understand that speed to market is largely going to become a real serious cost discussion, and it's a multiplier of what you're currently paying for those sort of transit times. At the moment, we're about 10 days away from having very little access to air freight in and out of New Zealand. So the one option for emergency movements is going to be freighter craft. So think of a DHL cargo plane. That becomes a charter flight, and we currently have charter flights in the market, but we're talking as a couple of dollars. We might be talking $20 USD a kilo, so it's quite a big jump. So we're actually encouraging our customers and the market to air freight as much as you can now in the next couple of weeks, like force freight into your supply chain, and then get stuff on sea as well, because sea freight is going, and I do run the sea freight business in Auckland, so I would say this, but sea freight is actually moving nearly business as usual, so it's not going to constrict your supply chain like the air freight will. So if you are overly exposed to air freight now, you need to reach out to Main Freight and talk about what those options are to get that freight into New Zealand. Okay. Shipping lines are pretty much back to normal. There is a container imbalance globally at the moment. So what we saw with China going into hibernation for a month is that there was no empties for re-export back out of New Zealand. So that's still actually in place. We've got a real shortage of reefer containers at the moment. So if you've got chilled cargo going northbound, you're going to struggle to find space. So we're talking weeks potentially to get that space. So the good news is that that's going to free up. Big freight forwarders are playing a big part in booking dry cargo in a non-operating reefer to get those boxes to New Zealand, and the imbalance is going to sort itself out pretty quickly from that front. China is the worst country of all to go into hibernation because we're so exposed from an import front. And so that's the container imbalance is largely going to resolve itself. We're encouraging customers to look at LCLs, so smaller lot movements as well. Cash flows probably going to be tightening up for some of us, and so smaller orders more often on a regular sea freight movement is actually not a bad idea. So again, make sure you reach out to Main Freight. What that looks like is, I have a sales background, is moving a couple of pallets at a time, and I'm sure most of you that have been exposed to international movements understand what LCL means. There are a lot of regular trades, both import and export, currently in and out of New Zealand, and all of those remain status quo. It's just whether or not your supply chain can get conditioned as fast as possible to deal with the transit time that was 2 to 3 days or 3 to 4 days to being 2 weeks, and that's the biggest thing. But at the moment, Main Freight, we're one of the larger forwarders in the market, and so we see we have a responsibility to partaking in charter flights to get that cargo to New Zealand, and we see it as an opportunity to give a solution to the customers, but we're going to be sensible with it. The problem is we don't understand what those numbers look like. So on the Tasman at the moment, just in big round numbers, to hire a plane and go back and forth, you could be 350 to 350,000 US dollars to go deep sea. So we're talking mainland Europe. We could be 650, 700 USD again. And so we're just really, obviously, as that passenger volume decreases, the demand for charter flights is going to increase for medical, raw materials for food production and the like. So we are already talking about it. The board of Main Freight supports putting that on, and it is a big risk because someone's got to pay for that flight up front, whether or not you got 10 tonne in it or 100 tonne, which is the goal, is 100 tonne. So there's going to absolutely be a need for it. There will be a cost on the market. We'll try and mitigate that as much as possible. And I guess as the passenger lines come back on, so they're talking sort of couple of weeks for the hangar doors to come down, so to speak, but the run back in to get those services back up is a bit longer than 2 weeks. So we're not sure what that looks like at the moment, but we're just telling all our customers at the moment. A lot of sales calls are being cancelled, obviously, for our team. People want to restrict one-on-one contact. Don't know why we're in this big public gathering today, but we're defying logic at the moment. But the most important thing for us is getting those solutions to the customers and offering something that's palatable. If you've got air freight coming from mainland Europe at the moment, we're working on a solution to road it all to Amsterdam and fly it to Hong Kong and then sea freight it down into New Zealand, so an air to sea. If you were to just go sea freight all the way to New Zealand and it was LCL, for example, you might be 60 plus days, and this thing could be over by then, touch wood. So you could halve your transit time plus some by doing an air to sea. So that's how we're looking to access those markets that aren't going to be able to give us direct flights in, and then pushing LCL cargo for short sea. That's industry speak there, but Australia, South China, and the US is largely going to be, there is going to be passenger craft to Los Angeles. That's going to be what was almost a daily flight is going to be down to 2 a week, and that's part of Air New Zealand's announcements of restricting down those services. So that's going to mean that space is now it's a real premium. So your rates are going to be up in the air as well, no pun intended, but the idea is that we just need to keep the freight moving, and we all need to play a part in that, and Main Freight does play a big part. So there's going to be some, we're giving out market updates on what each market's looking like. We're still actually getting sea freight out of Italy and Spain, so it still is operational somewhat, despite the media reports. So we can actually, space isn't an issue for sea freight at the moment. So we would say sea freight is probably 80 to 90% business as usual, with China coming back online, and air freight is going from business as usual to about or 15%. So it's just going to be trying to condition your supply chain to deal with an increased lead time. So get some stuff in the air today and get some sea freight on the water tomorrow. That sort of stuff happens all the time, and that happens in big transship ports, and Hong Kong is one of those. So it'll be where there's too much influx or a backlog, because there was a lot of cargo stranded at the start. They got inundated with empty containers as well, because they weren't sending out, and so that's part of the issue. The shipping lines are losing massively at the moment. They're moving empty containers all around the world, and they've asked us to load as much cargo in their desired containers. So that is, it's kind of like a mini peak season. It's export peak season at the moment, sending northbound, and China's a big part in that. So when they started to shop, they ended up carrying all those empties, and they still empty containers once they've been unloaded. So that's been a big part of the congestion. But we see that in all the big transship ports around the world, Cartagena, Singapore, and so it's something that'll resolve itself pretty quickly though. So the question was that the cargo is being held up in Hong Kong, and freight's not getting out. So, and that's been attributed to the export volume going up pre-China shutting their borders or shutting down operations, and those empty containers being returned to the empty parks, which are typically an integral part of ports moving on a day-to-day basis and clogging up the system. What's the lead time on reefers being available for re-export? Well, there is still reefers available in New Zealand. It's just about having a rational conversation with your freight forwarder. You're probably not going to get away 20 boxes at the moment. So to the point where we've got some import origins outer reefers. Getting reefer boxes out of Chicago is pretty tough, but they'll sure as heck take them. So it comes down to your freight forwarder understanding the wider market, and the shipping lines will absolutely release it, because then they can get the on-forward shipment from that receivable port. So it's really about just being upfront with your freight forwarder being upfront about and actually going away and looking at it. So we've got a lot of reefer customers that are still getting bookings as per usual, but we're just saying you can't move 10, you can move 3.
The first question to get Nina going: how do I have to pay my staff if they go into isolation?
What a fantastic question. I think the first thing I want to say is that as employers, you need to balance two pieces of legislation quite carefully. So one is the Health and Safety and Employment Act, and that's to keep all of your employees, your contractors and people that come onto your site safe. And that may mean getting other employees to go into isolation. But it may mean other things as well, which I'll get into later. And the other piece of legislation that you need to uphold is the Employment Relations Act, and that's about fairness to your employees. So it's about balancing those two things. Do you have to pay your staff if they go into isolation? Well, the answer to that is it depends on a number of things. So the one thing that you need to think about is, are they willing and able to come to work? And if they are, then you probably should be giving them special leave, but there's no obligation to. What you need to do is to talk to your people and work out an amicable solution. So it may be sitting down with them and saying, hey, look, we're a small business, we can't afford to pay you for 2 weeks special leave. Would you be open to using your sick leave? Would you be open to using some of your annual leave? Would you be able to take a day of unpaid leave, and then we can perhaps pay you a couple of days of special leave? Now, any agreement that you get with them, you should get in writing, and that could be a text message or an email. It doesn't need to be a formal documentation. But there's no substitute for communicating with people at this point in time. If they're required to be away from work by the government, they're not willing and able to come to work, then your first point of call should always be to look at their leave balances. Sick leave is supposed to only be used in instances where somebody is unwell or caring for somebody else who is unwell. But I think in these times, as long as you have agreement from your employees, they could use their sick leave even if they're not unwell, if they're self-isolating. Yeah, I've had a few instances. The question's what if they refuse to travel for work? Domestically at the moment, and this is obviously changing day by day, but the advice at the moment is that domestically travel is safe. So I would be exploring with them why they're feeling like that's not a good thing for them to do, perhaps you can put things in place for them, such as giving them a mask or some hand sanitizer, or if it's a short distance, perhaps looking at an alternative like driving. But at the moment, you can require them to go on a work trip if it's domestic. Of course, if it's international, then you should be cancelling that anyway. But, this advice may change day to day. It just depends on what's happening. So, encourage them to talk to you about what they're concerned about, try and overcome their concerns by providing a safe work environment for them. But if push comes to shove, you can require them to travel domestically. The questions, can you require them to go into isolation? If you believe that there's a real risk that they have COVID-19, and you'd have to have a reason for that, such as they've been in a red zone or they've been living with someone who's had it confirmed, then you can require them to go into isolation. Again, talking to them, trying to be reasonable, trying to negotiate is always going to be the first port of call, but the Health and Safety and Employment Act says you have to keep everybody else in your workplace safe. So if they're point blank refusing, you can go down a suspension line. If there's provisions in your employment agreement, I'd encourage you to look at those. And of course you have to go through the proper suspension process, so seek advice before you do that. But really that's a worst case situation. There are other clauses in your employment agreements that you should also be looking back on at the moment. And there may be a clause for business continuity, business disruption, or something called force majeure, which may account for things like a pandemic. So go back to your employment agreements, see if there's something in there that relates to that. There's also provision for you to require people to take annual leave, giving them 14 days notice. So I have a few clients who are wanting to do this, to say to people, look, business is really struggling at the moment. We actually don't have enough work for you. You have a significant amount of annual leave. We would like you to take it. If you don't agree to take it, then we'll instruct you to take it within 14 days. So that's another avenue that you can go down to try and eliminate these risks in your business with having to pay people all the time and having no work for them. So how do we reassure the remaining staff that they're safe? Again, that comes back to the Health and Safety and Employment Act. And you can be doing things like encouraging people to wash their hands. There's lots of hand sanitizer around, and perhaps disposable hand towels rather than your one hand towel you use for the whole office, providing tissues around the place, taking away anything that could potentially be shared, and letting your staff know that those are things that you're doing to help to keep them safe. You can also be asking any visitors to your workplace to please declare if they've been sick or had any potential exposure to the virus, to refrain from coming into your workplace, and making that check will help keep your staff safe. You can also try and encourage them to do things like video conferencing rather than going out to clients. And there's a lot of information on the Ministry of Health website about hygiene, and those are things like posters that you can put up in your workplace. I think, again, communication's really important. If your employees know that you care about their health and safety and that you're making them conscious about things like hygiene and contact with other people, then that's fulfilling your obligation in terms of taking care of them in the workplace. So the Privacy Act. So let's say that you have somebody that is suspected of having the virus and is waiting test results, or maybe they actually end up being confirmed. This could happen in the next few weeks as more and more people are likely to get the virus. It's really important from a Privacy Act perspective that you don't announce, Janet's been confirmed with the virus, she's staying away. There's a lot of ramifications for people at the moment overseas who've had the virus in terms of receiving, unwanted mail and messages and things like that, and having a bit of a stigma around it. If you have a small office and one person's away, just tell people that they're away and they're in self-isolation. You don't need to declare whether they've been found to have the virus or not. Just be really conscious of people's privacy in terms of their health in a situation like this. So I think you'll find a lot of workplaces are stopping mass gatherings, as they're calling them. I think from a work perspective, you can require people to not attend a work function. So for example, if you have an industry event and there's going to be 200 people there and they were going to be attending for work purposes, you can actually instruct them that they can't go. But what you can't do, which I have heard some employers doing, is telling them that they can't do other things in their personal life, for example, travel on their annual leave. So if somebody's wanting to travel overseas and they're taking annual leave, then what I'd encourage you to do is to talk to them about what happens when they return. And if they're going to go into self-isolation, really that should be on them in terms of taking annual leave for that time because they've chosen to go overseas and put themselves at risk. But you can't instruct them to not go overseas. You can't instruct them to not go to the movies or to the supermarket. Anything they're doing in their spare time, absolutely not. But absolutely for work purposes, you can instruct them not to go to a group event. Having an HR contingency plan, that's a really important point. A lot of my clients have been talking about, does everyone have remote access to be able to work from home? What part of their day could be fulfilled meaningfully with work? And things like how much sick leave does everybody have, how much annual leave, are there ways we can be managing this? And there's some people that actually would like a little bit of work-life balance for a period of time, and we could go out to them and say, is anyone prepared to just take a 4-day week for the next 12 weeks or however long it takes? And just working with your people to try and have that plan in place. I think this is a really interesting situation, and it is a moving target. So day by day, I'd encourage your leadership team or whoever's in charge in your business to be sitting down and looking at your human resources and how you can best be working with them and encouraging them to remain in your workplace. Give them a level of confidence as well. Firstly, that you're on top of things and you've got a plan, and secondly, that you'll talk to them about what's happening, that you've got open communication, because having them panicking in your workplace will only lead to less productive time for them as well, which is not great for you. The latest business support, can I comment on that? I was in the car when that was all being announced, and so I wouldn't say I could expertly, I've only just heard what I've heard, which is basically that, and anyone else feel free to correct me, I think it's $585 for full-time employees if the business can show, so per week, for 12 weeks, paid in a lump sum if the business can show that they've had a 30% decrease in sales. And I think $350 for part-time employees. So that's something that the business will apply for directly, and I believe that there's a cap of $150,000 per employer to be able to do that. In terms of what criteria you need to reach the 30% sales drop, what kind of information you need to provide for that, I can't comment on until I've done some better research on that, and whether there's any other assistance that's going to be offered. I would have hoped there'd be something offered for specific industries that have been hit really hard in terms of actual business support rather than just the employees. Of course, keeping the employees is really, really important, but there are businesses that are really suffering as well. I believe also that you have to make a commitment to keep those employees for whom you're applying for the additional assistance employed for the next 12 months at least 80% of their current income. I believe that's the situation. So did everyone hear the question? It's about whether if you've got a staff member that's confirmed with the virus, what's your duty of care to other employees who have been exposed by that staff member? That's a very good point, thank you. I failed to mention that. You definitely need to tell them if they have been in contact with that individual during that period of time. You do have a duty of care to those employees to tell them they may have been exposed and that they need to get tested. Yeah. Yeah, so talking to your employees about flexibility, things like dropping down to 4 days a week, and if they turn around and say no, you do need to do that sort of thing with consultation and agreement, and at this stage we're hoping that people will just work together in the hope that their business will improve and therefore that person will be able to keep their job. If that's not the case and you can really see that this is having a significant impact on your business, and despite taking the government's assistance you're still not going to be able to make ends meet, then you need to go through a proper consultation and redundancy process. So you need to seek advice to be able to do that, but potentially you'd be looking at changing jobs or removing roles. So even if you change a job from working 40 hours a week to working 15 hours a week, you would need to go through a change process to disestablish that role. Whether that person wishes to take that 15-hour-a-week option or not would be up to them, and if not, then they'd be looking at a redundancy situation. Yeah, absolutely. Free resources. So don't cut off your HR consultant under any circumstances. But if you do need really great advice, there's some very good information out there. The MB, so MBIE, you'll be familiar with them, I'm sure. They have really good resources. There's also a website called employment.govt.nz that has a lot of basic resources that you can use. If you've got a specific situation, it is always better to get a bit of advice. But if you want something generic, then those are really good resources you can go to, or any other business networking associations that you belong to as well.
Everything else today.
I think what you'll find is most people, like anything in society, most people will be reasonable. You'll always get the outliers, but I think work with your people, keep your communication open, and everything should be fine. That's a really good question. It depends on the relationship that's been established. So similar to your owner model and taking drawings, they're not technically an employee. But if somebody is an employee and they have an employment agreement and everything that you're supposed to be on track with, then all of the same rules apply. Yeah. The only thing that's slightly different in this situation is contractors. So obviously you have the same obligations in terms of health and safety in the workplace in terms of contractors, but you don't have the same obligation in terms of leave and terminating their contracts potentially. But one word of warning, be careful that your contractors are contractors, because just because you have a contract for services, if you're treating them like an employee, then they could be classed in the eyes of the law as an employee, and this may be a situation where they actually take you for that. So treat those people with as much dignity and respect as you can as well.
I'll try. Kia ora. The stay safe, stay informed, stay kind, I'd love to take credit for that, but it was actually the United Nations Secretary General. And it was really about thinking about your own safety and then jumping to the stay informed piece. As business owners, it's not just about the way that we communicate with our stakeholders, our customers, our employees, everybody that we're connected with. It's the way that we also interpret information that we're receiving from around the place. So separating the fact from the fear is a really important part of our role. And as employers, last year, before we moved into this situation where we need to really prepare and communicate for a new normal, Edelman runs a trust barometer that measures the level of trust in institutions and governments, businesses and so on around the world. And in the 2019 trust barometer, the most trusted person from their research was the employer. That was the information source that people felt the most reliant in and the most confident in when they were making decisions around what they were hearing, what was going on in the world. And I think at this moment in time, your employees, your people, are going to be turning to you as the first port of call when it comes to dealing with the uncertainty and the fear that they're facing and that we're all facing collectively around the pandemic. So one thing I'd like to do, I'm just going to put the microphone down for a moment. It's just a little demonstration. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to ask you to clap or whistle or stamp your feet or something, and I'm just going to talk normally at you without the microphone. And then when I lift my hand up, stop. Okay? So 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to tell you now it's really important what you do. Okay. That's the level of noise that you've got to be heard over, to your customers, to your employees, to everybody else, because there is so much noise. So finding out the facts of the situation, finding out the legalities, the requirements and so on, absolutely imperative, but then taking it to your employees and being together in this so that it's not top-down information that you're giving. You're actually including people in the communications process. You're listening to them. You're understanding a little bit more about why somebody might not want to come to work because their wife's told them to. It might be that they're a carer for somebody in a particularly vulnerable group. So they've got that concern going on in their mind, and they're hearing all that noise. They're not hearing the noise from you. From a business perspective, what we have to really try and hard to do is not just stay viable through this period of time, but look out the other side. Shannon mentioned, we don't know how long this is going to last for. Everybody's at a very different stage of a curve. And if you think, you've probably all seen the flatten the curve graphic that's going around, yeah? What I'd like you to try and do is imagine that underneath that, you've got your grid, you've got your peak curve, you've got your flattened curve. Underneath that, you've got two more curves. You've got confidence and you've got trust, yeah? People's confidence and trust in business, society, structures and so on is going to be absolutely shaken to the core over the next period of time because there is so much uncertainty. They're probably going to get sick. Somebody's going to be unwell that they love. There's going to be worries about can they work? Is there money there to feed my family? Is there food because we don't know if it's going to get shipped in? Yeah. So our role in this as good corporate citizens, if you like, is to help to work through that confidence and trust curve. And you won't do that if you've got top-down communications. It's only going to be if you work with your staff, with your suppliers, with your customers, and communicate and communicate and communicate all the time with clarity and consistency. Have a crisis plan, have a communications crisis plan so that the people within your organisation know who's responsible for what, who's going to take over when this bit of the puzzle goes wrong, who's going to be able to step in and keep all of the employees informed if you get sick. Yeah, we're not invincible. Yeah, we may have to go into self-isolation. Have a system where you do a dry run. At the beginning of the week, have half your workforce work from home if they can. Later in the week, have the other half. That will throw up some problems as to whether or not you're going to be able to maintain momentum and keep your business rolling over the course of the time that this may last for. But however it lasts, if we have got a hiatus within our organisation, custom is down, business is down, we can't deliver the services that we're doing, take that time to look ahead. Take that time to plan to say, okay, the way that we do business now is going to alter radically because our industry sector, whatever that industry sector may be, has changed fundamentally. It's going to be a long time before any capacity will be increased to the degree it was previously. So how can we be smart? How can we be fleet of foot? There's always the number 8 wire saying that comes up here, but I think probably in the next few months, going into next year at least, that innovation, that ability to change the way that we do things and to collaborate with each other is going to be absolutely vital, because this isn't a let's all lock down for a month or two, we'll all get better and it'll all be good. It's significant changes to the way that our connected world has now becoming disconnected. So how do we overcome that in the future? Keep in touch, talk with each other, involve people, use their creativity, build it together. That would be my thing there.
Brilliant.
It's absolutely about cutting through the noise, because we will be prioritising the things that are going to inform our judgment and our decision making. So listening to people that we work with and alongside is absolutely paramount if we're going to make good decisions and allay their fears and maintain those relationships that we have with our employees and suppliers and so on. If they're in a situation where they're feeling that the response is underwhelming, then I think it's the discussing it with them and determining the context against which they're making that judgment. I mean, the government reactions in China, December, January, February, yeah, they have a number of advantages that are considered disadvantages in different societies. So the ability to say, right, that's it, we're going to do this, and people will comply with that particular instruction, isn't necessarily something that's going to be happening or undertaken by somewhere else in the world, in another country. So contextualising the situation that you're in with your employees and discussing their own expectations and yours, and finding that middle ground, finding that, okay, well, if you feel like this in this situation, what can we do to make sure that you stay with us because you're a valued employee and we need you with us, and balancing out with your own needs and concerns. But that looking at it, turning the world and looking at it from everybody's perspective is a key part of our role as business communicators, not just having that one single perspective. If we do that, it narrows the view and it limits the choices and opportunities that we can then pursue with those that work with us. And I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's, you know, it's a, there are, yeah, yeah,
that we need to be aware that
yeah,
there's a whole another
different
way of looking at
contexts,
the
yeah,
situation that
very different contexts. And I think people are feeling progressively alarmed by the day. The noise that they're receiving through social media, through mainstream media and so on, each will have a different perspective and each will take the piece of information that they believe to be salient for their own readership or their own business, whatever it may be. So that staying informed is taking, you know, the helicopter view of everything, assessing all of the information and then being in a position where you can really start to bring people together. That the question about resources, there's I've put together a resource about crisis planning there, which you can have as a digital download. It's free. There's also a really good one that I came across earlier today, which is planc.io, which is a free business continuity tool for businesses with under 500 people. The MB site has got all of the resources that you might need to help inform you as to different aspects of the situation, and also things like the cultural considerations that may arise. So look around for the resources, and I'm sure Russ and everybody on the Alternative Board will be collating resources to help you. But if you haven't got the resources, find them, because you need a crisis plan, you need a continuity plan, and you need a communications plan. And those plans are going to change every day, depending on the circumstances. You're going to need A teams, B teams, C teams, C/1 teams as well, because again, you might get sick, Team C might get sick. Who are your employees that are absolutely vital physical contacts? What are you going to do to help make sure that they're safe? Are you going to get ideas from them because they need to do a very specific task? Keep the electric on, for example, otherwise we'll not be having any Zoom conferences. So there's lots of areas where we need to get into the detail of process as well as the detail of disruption, but always the detail of communication persistently.
So I suppose from my perspective, it's pretty simple. We've been through, GFC, we've been through, different shocks, earthquakes and stuff like that. And I think it's been reiterated that communication is probably the most important thing. I'm in a deep discussion with our credit team at the moment around a new to bank opportunity. And we've actually gone back to the client twice because the pace of change of this situation has meant we need to go back to the client and say, well, hey, you stress tested this initially at 10, 15%, but actually this now could be bigger. So what are the implications for your business? How do you sort of work through the planning and the thinking when something's moving so fast? So what we're saying to our clients is, hey, every situation is unique and every situation is different. So we've got a policy that says, we can put a temporary loan in place, but guess what? It's got to be repaid. How much security do we hold versus, so have we got your house or your commercial buildings, or are we just on a cash flow lens? So every situation is different, and we need to sit down and discuss where the issues are to work out what we can do and can't do. We don't bank businesses, we bank people. So the people are the number one thing. If we've got faith and confidence in what the individuals are doing in that business, it makes it much easier to support the transaction that's in front of you. If you know you're taking proactive action and you're trying to look at your overheads or your costs, or you know you've got a cash flow hole for a period of time, how do you get out of that cash flow hole? How long before you get stock to be able to sell and turn that back into cash and be able to trade your way back out? How long is that hole in the cycle that you've got? So each situation is unique and different, and you need to understand that to the nth degree. We're seeing really good reports come out of the likes of the top accountants firms. They're all putting out strategies and ideas for you to go and have a look at, and that you can apply back into your business. You need to be talking to the Alternative Board and your advisors around you. from a legal aspect, is if you can't meet your debts when they're due, you're technically insolvent. So you should take legal advice around that, because trading while we're technically insolvent is something that we seem to do a lot in New Zealand. And I've been here for nearly 20 years in June. So while I still sound like I'm fresh off the boat, I've been here and I've worked with businesses through GFC, through earthquakes, and I've seen pain and I've seen positive stories come out of this. At the same time, this is going to create opportunities for some people. So just talking to somebody earlier, is actually you can't buy a laptop for love of money at the moment, but if you've got them, they're like gold, and people pay good money for them, because all of a sudden people having worked on laptops mean they can work from home and other things. So we're looking at what are you doing around the planning phase? How does that actually translate back into your forecasting? So if you don't forecast, you're probably not somebody that the bank really going to be excited to put a whole lot of additional facilities in place for, because if you don't know or have a plan A and plan B and plan C, how do we give you the funding to get through if you don't know when you're going to be able to pay it back? If you've got a strong balance sheet and you can lend against the balance sheet, revenues, vanity, and profit, sanity. How long before you become unprofitable again if you've got a period of 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months to become profitable again? And as long as we've got an understanding of what the assumptions are behind the cash flow projections, we can then see ways to try and help as you need to. I think the most important thing is talk to your bank, talk to your advisors, talk to your accountants, and don't be afraid to front up with the realistic situations at the moment. So we're having to report on a weekly basis to Reserve Bank what industries are coming to us for support, what the level of support is, and what we're doing for that. So there's a real strong commitment from Business New Zealand to and through the banks to provide the support back into the businesses that we're banking with, and that's holistic across the board. And I think there's going to be a lot more collaboration across all the banks as we try and keep New Zealand out of a recession, or trading out of a recession in a really short time frame, because it's not good for business. It's not good for New Zealand Inc. So we want to support all of business, regardless of who you're banking with. So talking about quantitative easing, what are we seeing on the horizon? I think the commitment from government to try and put money back into infrastructure and the package today, it's starting to try and put more money back into the economy. The government's got the ability to borrow more money and put it into productive sectors. I think they've done an initial launch today, and our gut feel is it's not enough yet, and we don't actually understand what that means. For industries such as forestry and travel, we've seen massive impact in a really short time frame, but in the 3 to 6 month window that this thing could be around for, and it may be longer, we don't know. We think there's going to need to be a lot more done to provide businesses with opportunities to continue to trade, and I think it also comes down to mindset. One of my biggest fears is people decide that things are getting too hard and that shut up shop, as opposed to finding ways to combat this or work forward in a positive manner. So, we've got to stay positive that there is a short pain threshold to go through, and we look for ways to, in our own backyard as to what we can do to try and work through this, and not, yes, if we get some quantitative easing and more funds being injected into the economy, that helps, but it doesn't mean we don't look at what we can do and what we can control. What's the view for a business that's been trading really well for a sustainable period of time, and then suddenly hits the wall at the moment? And the prime example probably is the travel industry right now, where we've seen bookings and everything cancelled left, right, and centre, and suddenly cash flow dries up almost completely. In New Zealand, talking about cancelling 80% of the flights, etc., etc. So the view is we want to support those businesses. We know that the people, it's outside of their control, and it'll come down to an early conversation with the bank around, hey, this is what we've done. There's going to need to be things done in that business around hard decisions around staff and how long can you retain at the cost base that you've got. What is your break-even point for your business? when do you return to a break-even point, and how long, is a piece of string around the time flow to get trading business back up. If you haven't got a strong balance sheet and you've got no equity in the business, it's obviously going to be a much harder conversation. But the banks at the moment, and I'm talking obviously from a Kiwi Bank perspective primarily, we've got appetite to try and support businesses. We don't want to be known as a fair weather banker. We want to understand that we're going to continue to try and support where we can for as long as we can. But again, it does come down to, what are your plans? What are you thinking? How long, have you got the ability to retain the cost base that you've got? What are the fixed overheads that you can't get rid of? And have you spoken to your landlord? Have you spoken to your staff? Have you spoken to suppliers? Have you chased your debtors? It's all the fundamentals that you need to do to keep working through and have a budget or a plan in place. So if we need to put on interest only or lengthen the terms to be able to get through, the one thing that we will always say is it costs you more when you restructure, and not in a fee up front, but in the fact that you're going to pay more interest over the cycle of the loan. So it's not something that we encourage people to do, but if you need to do that in this time frame, we certainly are committed to looking at restructures to work with people to get the payments down to an affordable level as we need to. So I think we've got the benefit of having been through a GFC only 10 years ago, and the New Zealand banks, off the back of the parent banks, came through in a really good shape. The government was looking to increase the capital requirements to continue to strengthen the industry, and they've been confident enough to say that they're going to delay that for a further 12 months, which has effectively released 47 billion back into the economy to continue to trade and provide liquidity to the market. So we're in a really positive space, and as a New Zealand banking group, we feel confident that we're not in a position where the length of what this is forecast is going to have an impact around liquidity. So the issue, I think, is in the depositors, is where we've got a lot of people reliant on a return from their investments, and those investment returns have shrunk and continue to shrink, especially with the 0.75 reduction again in the OCR in the last 24 hours. So that's one of the challenges for us in this economy, is to look after the people who've been reliant on those investments and now suddenly find that their earning capacity on a daily basis has shrunk to almost nothing. Yeah, so the new regulations for the capital requirements were coming in from 1 July and 2020, and now they've been pushed out for 12 months. So it's given liquidity back into the market that the banks can lend that money out and still maintain a very healthy capital ratio. The challenge is when people and when a bank locks a loan in on a fixed interest rate, the money is borrowed and priced at that rate, and so a fixed interest rate means you incur a break cost, an economic cost to the bank to break that fixed cost. If you're on a variable rate, and you obviously get the benefit of that interest rate reduction straight away. And I think all the banks have committed to passing on the full cost of reduction. But on a fixed interest rate, there's a real economic cost, which has always been a bone of contention in a falling market. People never mind in a rising market, but in a falling market, it's the one thing that the banking ombudsman gets the most complaints about, because the true economic cost is not going to be borne by the banks, because the shareholders wouldn't accept that. So right now, I don't see the banks accepting the cost of the economic break to reduce the interest rates on housing loans. Today, as I say, and what I say today may be different tomorrow, is our policies haven't changed. We haven't changed our risk appetite settings, so we're still open for business. We're obviously asking more questions, and we're expecting a greater degree of scrutiny around where we're lending, because that's prudent and it's something that business owners should be doing for themselves anyway. But I don't believe, and I think that was demonstrated through the GFC, is the banks did restrict, but there was still more lending put through into the economy during that period, which is why we were able to trade out of it in a reasonably good shape. And I think the words of one economist, New Zealand was just less munted than some of the rest of the world. And I think that's, again, we're pretty resilient here. Business owners, we don't run with a lot of sophistication. Apart from the corporate end of the world, we make a lot of decisions by the seat of our pants. We now need to start getting a little bit more robust around our thinking and around our planning and stuff like that. And again, this raises that the mindset that you can't just, she'll be right. Actually, we do need to do a bit more thinking, a bit more planning, and a bit more focused understanding of where our business is going to be and what does that look like in 1 month, 1 year, 5 years, and have a bit of a goal and a bit of a plan around that. So, as I said early on, we bank people, and it's about the decisions and understanding that they've got some process and some decision making in their business that provides the assumptions, which then drives the numbers that then produces the results. So absolutely it does.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's about school closures and something I'm concerned about myself. What happens to parents if they're required to work from home or they can't work from home because they're having to look after school children? That is a real possibility. At the moment, they're saying that they're not looking at school closures, which is good, but eventually that may happen. I think, again, you're just going to have to work with your employees where they can work from home, and possibly the situation's going to occur where both parents are at home, and so you might be able to make an agreement that one parent supervises the children one day, the other parent supervises the children the other day, and you can work in with each individual and their employer to make sure that perhaps your employee can be working from home 2 days a week or 3 days a week and then taking some annual leave or sick leave, or you can be applying some special leave in that situation as well, for that exact instance. I think that's a really good question. Another just public service announcement, if I may. As far as I'm aware, the minimum wage rate is still going to be increasing on the 1st of April to $18.90 per hour. So just don't miss that in the scheme of things. I know there was some talk about National requesting Labor to put that on hold, but as far as I'm aware, unless Jacinda's announced something different today, that increase is still going ahead 1st of April. So just factor that into your business plans.
One of the things that I'd suggest is a really good thing to do today is to go away and look at your business and think about the different scenarios that may have an effect or an impact on what you do and how you do it. And it might seem extreme, but you have to plan for the extreme now. There was the quote, where you're, oh look, there's a fire, we'll get the fire extinguisher. No, call the fire brigade. Because there has to be some urgency to the actions that you take. And you're only going to be able to do that by looking at scenarios that even 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, would have seemed completely unlikely. So that part of the planning is essential if you're going to be able to make headway in what's going to be a complex, evolving and challenging situation for everybody. I've found myself over the last 3 months feeling a bit like Calamity Cath, because I've been working with organisations around the scenarios that might not happen or may happen, but for most of them, those scenarios have come to pass. But by looking at them in the eye, we've been able to address some ways of mitigating the risk, mitigating the circumstances. So school closures, it could well happen tomorrow. Who knows? The school holiday's coming anyway, but put it in your pot, look at it, figure out what you're going to do if it does.
One other thing I wanted to add just about taking care of your employees is think about if you have any employees who are in that high risk category, so whether they have respiratory conditions, if they're at the older end of the scale, if they have high blood pressure, and it might be something that you want to just open up a discussion about with your people and say, if you believe you're in a high risk category and you want to come and talk to me about that, then let's talk about creating some extra level of protection for you and putting the ball in their court. If they don't want to share that information with you, then that's fine. You've done everything you can in terms of safety and taking all practicable steps. But that might be something that you want to put out to your people. You don't know if there are people that are vulnerable. You may not be aware. And they can be people you can help to self-isolate or protect in other ways.
Yeah, from the bank's perspective right now is as long as people can afford to pay the debt, the security question is going to be further down the track. Primarily, let's just work through the next couple of months and see, as long as we can meet your debts, the conversation around the security and the value of security is far away. We're not even contemplating that at the moment. The primary thing is let's just trade through and make sure you can meet your commitments as they fall due. Security is a long game. If you wait long enough, the property prices will go back up, right? That's the reality. So I can't see any of the banks taking a different view on that right now.
We've mentioned Plan B and C, and I'm just going to throw out there some ideas at the moment, and it's really just to get people thinking. But these are the sort of common things you have to think about in recessions. Sale and lease back of assets. One of the things Air New Zealand can do is it can lease back its planes from financiers. An equity injection. Where can you find one? Might even be crowdfunding. Closing unprofitable branches. Selling a business unit that doesn't necessarily fit any longer. Merge with a competitor or complementary business. Operating remotely, we've heard about. Encouraging holiday leave, temporary or permanent layoff. Mothballing plant. Focusing sales efforts on different markets. For example, you might be able to go into the consumer or food service rather than hospitality, or even different export markets. And lastly, but not least, increasing marketing spend so that you actually come out of it faster. So I just wanted to draw some quick conclusions from today. Understand your supply chain risk. Going forward, we're going to have to diversify. CEOs will get killed for only having one route. So speak to your freight forwarders early. Understand your obligations around staff. Communicate clearly and concisely. Have a plan. Review your contracts with lawyers. And certainly speak to your insurance as soon as possible. And I can't reiterate, more importantly, speak to your bank early and talk to them and build a financial model so that you actually understand and can show what happens to your break even. With Plan B and C, you need to act early. Every time we have one of these, acting early is good. And when we come out the other side of this, that's actually the time that most receiverships and liquidations actually happen. The most common cause historically has always been overtrading, because working capital is depleted and then you run out of cash as you grow. So that's something to bear in mind. Liquidity equals opportunity for cheap acquisitions. You make your most money when you buy cheap. There was a lot of traders will dollar cost average down their share position at the moment. We all have tools, and we have tools at the Alternative Board to help you develop the Plan B and C. The expertise and help are available if you want or require it. And now, more than ever, we need strong leaders like you with clear-headed thinking and aligned execution. And having an external person you can turn to or a sounding board is a great way of helping you make those tough decisions. We can help with virtual facilitation of contingency and continuity plans. And so now is the time to lean on us and Kiwi Bank and the other advisors and your own network of accountants, lawyers, and other advisors. So make sure you do it. Finally, we were going to write down and get you to write down one thing you were going to take away from today, but we can't share pens and pencils any longer. So we'll send out an email to you with one thing that you are going to follow up from today. And we'll call you in 4 weeks to see whether you've done it. And just to put this lastly into perspective, before we give a round of applause to our speakers, I was with somebody yesterday and they Googled how many children die in Africa each day from starvation? And surprisingly, the answer is 5,500, which is 2 million in a year. So it just goes to show you how we don't get coverage of a lot of other things.